And I think we're going to have a wonderful opportunity for discussion with each other and for listening to, hi Susan, to our guest Maria Pia Lara. And I'll just tell you sort of a personal story, and then I'll provide a little bio, and then hand it over to Dr. Lara to share her paper with us and her ideas. I met Maria Pia Lara a couple of years ago, trolling around for interesting books on narrative, and found her book on narrating evil from Columbia University Press, and was stunned by the richness of the theory and the project, really, of trying to understand the processes of narration, the politics, the production of meaning. So I think she has much to contribute theoretically to the study of narrative, and has great application to conflict analysis and resolution. In fact, anybody who takes my narrative class has to read this book. So it was a great pleasure for me to, when we began the center, to begin imagining who we might invite that we could learn from and with, and Dr. Lara was right on the top of my list. So it's a great pleasure to have her here today. She's professor of philosophy at University of Autónoma and Metropolitana in Mexico, and has come here just to give this lecture to us and be with us for a couple of days. She has her degrees from Barcelona, of the Autónoma, sorry, and working with Victoria Gomez, who she said is fantastic.
This is great philosophy.
Good to know, but I'm sure
She's just won a prize now.
Okay, great. She's teaching and doing research in Mexico, where she is, and some of her books include the book called Moral Textures from UCal Press, the book that I know, Narrating Evil, from Columbia University Press, and a new book that's coming out in January or so called Disclosures of Politics, also with Columbia University Press. She specializes in narrative, politics of meaning, and other topics like transitional justice, Susan. So,
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for inviting me, Sarah, Carlos, Sneha, for all the efforts you've done. I'm very, very happy to be here. I first proposed something like reviewing the book, but then I thought that it was much more interesting and challenging if I go through something that it's been like going on for the last few years, in terms of the people who dedicate themselves to study memory. You know, there's been like if there was a cultural turn in the 20 years ago or some, now we would call the actual moment, the actual times, subjectivist turn. Books by people like Anker Smith and historians who have completely now given up on ideas about how to get things better or how to reconstruct the society. They usually have now conceived of a radical rupture with those kind of discourses. So I thought that my challenge would be to focus on doing a criticism to these kind of positions, and for people who are interested in reviewing and seeing the theory of post-metaphysical reflective judgment that I'm proposing, I have another article that was published in a volume on Claudia Card. You know Claudia Card?
yeah.
She wrote a book called The Atrocity Paradigm. And I sort of wanted to engage with her, saying what was wrong with her theory of atrocity. So it was a very, we were very good friends until then. I don't know why she stopped writing to me. But my aim there was to try to sort of put the clues of what a theory about evil should be, and what was wrong with her views, because she had some prejudgments about institutions such as marriage, saying marriage is evil, and I just thought this is the very opposite of what I want to do, right? So in that case, if people are interested in this article, I'll send you a copy and
We can
and
circulate
you. But my paper today, then it's much more focused in the challenge of building up the future and what it is narratively speaking this challenge about. So why we need narratives in politics. The Argentinian philosopher Néstor García Canclini, in his book La Sociedad Sin Relato, claims that our global societies are now societies without plots. What does he mean by this description of today's problem? I believe he's saying that in our post-postmodern times, we have no more use of grand narratives that could guide us in a general sense. But it is not clear whether he's also suggesting that we lack a capacity to produce small narratives, which can construct a map where we can find guidance through criticism and create new designs, what I call concepts and metaphors, about the new political goals through wider theoretical accounts. According to García Canclini, the critical force of postmodern criticism put an end to the belief that grand theories played a fundamental role in human life. Today, we are left only with small fragments or partial accounts that play no role in our political understanding of our present crisis. In their struggles to erase the grand narratives from political theories, postmoderns ended up discarding the critical contrast between the therapeutic role of small narrative devices that have been so useful in helping us make sense of our experiences for collective projects and connecting them to wider goals or political expectations from the social actors. The fact is that without grand narratives, it is almost impossible to create individual ones. It is also true the other way around. Postmodern thinkers insisted on the fact that those grandiose theoretical accounts which sought not only to describe society's ills, but also to propose possible cures were dead. They claimed that postmodern theories were less inclined to be concerned with societies fitting into great stories of salvation, redemption, or crisis. Such goals, they insisted, were static, finalist, or utopian. Moreover, they have proven themselves to be authoritarian ways to impose models on societies that did not work well. However, in considering these critical views today, Maeve Cook, a very close friend of mine, argues that particular representations, I'm quoting her, of the good society as regulative ideas that have an imaginary and fictive character are much needed in our critical theory and our visions for social agents. These regulative ideas should be filled with claims of validity because they envision how things could be thought, theoretically becoming better. For that reason, they must be open to intersubjective interrogation in public processes of argumentation. Thus, postmodern theorists consistently fought against the modern perspectives of building up theories that can take shape as grand narratives because they were supposed to be accounts that aimed at explaining everything. Postmoderns regarded narratives as just partial, contextual, and subjective accounts that describe specific dimensions of our lives. As a result, they are limited. This turn to radical subjectivism has led us to discard any interest that does not put our experiences into larger contexts. Therefore, we are described by García Canclini as plotless societies. As a result of these criticisms, postmodern theories have abandoned the spaces or horizons where we can think about the future of our political goals and how, where, and why they can be placed. The postmodern debates about the limits of narrativity, which took place during the 1980s and 1990s, erase distinctions between theories and narratives as much as they raise doubts about the ability of theories to describe possible futures or develop solutions and hopes for social ills. Because narrative accounts could not achieve grand social transformations as modernity once thought, they were seen as no longer functional. According to Garcia Canclini, once we have accepted this position, all we are left with are societies without plots. Without the possibility of imagining political goals, there can be no future. And without a future, there is no place for social change and for political change. So in our global times, we have given up the theoretical mapping of critical theory. Nevertheless, larger narratives involving myths developed by conservative thinkers have appropriated the global imaginary. Mythical tales like the clash of civilizations are increasingly making our societies fearful of other cultures, especially Muslim, and most of all, of immigration. Similarly, the myth that markets can and should function without regulations by the state is an essential dogma underlying neoliberal theories. While there are no counter-narratives against this hegemonic occupation of our global imaginary, some recent films and stories have begun to change this scenario. If you want to discuss after the movies that I say are changing this scenario, we'll do that after. This is the reason we need to focus now on the relation between narratives and metaphors, because we need these conceptual devices not only to articulate what is wrong with the myths that support the current political crisis, but also to fill in the larger theories about our times and thus redesign the landscape of global narrations. Larger theories coin metaphors about society's self-descriptions, while they help political actors see their possible agency as they identify society's ills. These kind of theoretical accounts help people frame a map where they can situate the moral wrongs and distortions of other theories. Indeed, they occupy an important place in the social imaginary, since actors must believe in what they are doing. These self-descriptions provide significance for political action. They find resonance in the minds of political actors while they open the spaces of political expectations. So the critical issue of avoiding finalist theories or of using grand narratives to explain everything that was a strong argument raised by postmodern theories should be examined. They claim it was a necessary step in acknowledging that accepting the authority of any theory or text as an embodiment of the truth is a wrong way to think about societies versus theories. This confusion has definitely ended. However, in our postmodern times, we should consider narratives as essential tools to help us understand our present and to disclose possible futures by providing a critical scrutiny of our pasts and the experiences of actors, since they do define our ways of self-understanding with the help of the social imaginary. And I'm thinking here about the definition of Charles Taylor of the social imaginary. He defines the social imaginary as such: the ways that people imagine their social existence, how they fit together with others, how things go on between them and their fellows, the expectations that are normally met, and the deeper normative notions and images that underlie their expectations. This is Charles Taylor's definition of the social imaginary. Thus, we still need to spell out what is involved in the relationship between past reappropriations in order to see if they can disclose possible futures. We do not want to recover them without a more nuanced discussion of their limitations as raised by postmodern critics. Seeing new ways to use narratives should strengthen our views about the primacy of the political. In this sense, we should consider the pasts in the plural as constructs that can enable us to move back and forth between the past and the future in a dynamic relationship. Analyzing the relationship between narrativity and politics helps us understand how political agency is shaped by the goals of social actors and their expectations about social transformations. It also alerts us to what is missing from our present views about what Reinhard Koselleck has called, in a coined word or concept, futures past. So I'm going to use this term as he does. So narrativity and politics. Because they raise such a questions as who narrates what is appropriated by the narrator, and why a narrator selects a particular episode from the past to reconstruct. Narratives are basic political tools that focus on the actions of agents versus their political goals. This is always like that. Those past actions become the material tools or constructs. They provide the significance of the exemplars of political actions, and they become normative references in society's political agendas. They can help us clarify the connections between the actors' past experiences and the ways in which those experiences express or fail to express the expectations and social dreams of political actors. What I wish to argue is that there are at least 3 different normative models of how the past, which can be recovered and projected into the future, could function. I'm going to speak at the end about this, but I'm just going to mention them now. 1, as a foundational model. 2, as a model of continuity with the past, which I call a normalizing model. And 3, as a rupture model with the past. Each of these 3 models, which we can take as ideal types, since I am considering them as analytical devices, proposes a different relationship between the past and future and has different political goals. What is at stake here is how these narratives can have different critical views about the past actions and why the past becomes a fundamental construct of our possible futures. Well, now that the election is come, but I mean, I was going to come before that, so it was going to be a little more, I thought it was going to be more interesting to see, but you'll see why I used Obama. So this section is called Obama's Crossroad. I am aware that the United States has recently had a presidential election, and for that reason, I call this section Obama's Crossroad, even though Obama managed to win this election in spite of several mistakes he made during the campaign. So, the political crisis that the United States suffered after a few years of Obama's first term in office is illustrative of what I mean by societies finding or failing to find their mythical tale as their mediating structure or device between past and future. Obama, who won in 2008, beat Hillary Clinton in her quest to become the Democratic candidate and then defeated John McCain in the presidential contest, never developed a narrative connecting the past of the United States with its future. In his first term as president, his victory was overshadowed by his lack of finding the appropriate plot for his collective narrative. All of a sudden, he was seen just as a symbol of something that did not live up to people's expectations, and his victory was critically questioned by the left as well as the right. Indeed, Obama's role as an actor was simply an empty signifier. In part, Americans could not identify themselves with him anymore because they did not interpret his actions as the change he had promised. But there was also something else. Obama could not explain the content and the values of his own progressive policies, even as he was carrying them out. because he did not connect them with the recovery of a certain past. A mythical account of the needed refoundation or a rupture. Myths play a big role in the social imaginary of political agents. Chiara Bottici, another colleague of mine, argues that it is precisely because myths are not only stories, but a story that works as a Begründung because it coagulates and reproduces significance that we need them. So we cannot simply say that fictions are purely fictions because myths provide us with some kind of knowledge about societies and their goals. The exposure to certain narrative myths can and does influence how we see ourselves and our orientations in political terms. If we can accept that mythical narratives can present or distort facts, it is because they can unfold a pathos of societies with their plots. Thus, myths are not passive elements. They play a very active role in how societies see themselves and in how they provide significance when they use them to articulate their goals towards possible futures. Myths have a logos of their own. As Bottici suggests, George Sorel understood the role of myth because he recognized that there can be no mobilization of political action without a powerful set of images that assure those engaged in this action about their triumph of their case. The logos of myths allows political actors to see themselves as the embodiments of specific goals and values which are presented as moral images or moral embodiments of those myths. Against Obama's void in his first term, the Republicans took over the social imaginary and the public sphere by constructing a counter-narrative by misinforming the wider public about who Obama really was. They represented him as an outsider who was the cause of all the ills of the American society, and they portrayed his policies as a radical rupture from the past foundation of the American Republic because he wanted, and I'm quoting, to construct a socialist or an authoritarian state. That's what the Republicans said. How did this happen? According to Drew Weston, a professor of psychology at Emory University, Obama failed to articulate a narrative that could engage the people to identify with his goals and his actions because he could not narrate them with clarity and eloquence, though he's very eloquent in dealing with speeches, not with narratives though. He could not find significance in placing himself at one end of the political spectrum where the actors on the other end, the Republicans, were guilty of the problems his presidency was facing. Thus, Weston concluded that, and I'm quoting Weston, the stories our leaders tell us matter probably as much as the stories our parent tells us as children because, he insisted, they orient us to what is, what could be, and what should be, to the worldviews they hold and to the values they hold sacred. What Weston was pointing out was Obama's failure to provide the people with significance through his own creative reappropriation of a past narrative that could lead the nation into his own political program. This construction needed the capturing of the past as a recovery of the foundational myth of the American dream. Obama had to break with the recent past by showing what was wrong with it, and then show how the American refoundation could take on an altogether new meaning as a result of his policies. But he was unable to orient civil society about his need for their support, even as he was trying to enact a bold transformation with his health care program, a real change that had already defeated the Clinton administration. He also needed to articulate some transformational consensus future goals that connected to the dreams about the refounding of the Republic. These transformation goals were of a universal kind, since he wanted all citizens to enjoy the possibilities of a healthcare program as parts and parcels of a Bill of Rights. Alas, Obama could not explain that, and it caused him to temporarily lose contact with his base. His failure also allowed the Republican right into the House and Senate and to develop a counter-narrative of their own, which was aimed at destroying any possibility of his winning a second term. Weston's article must have had some impact on Obama's advisors, since the major achievement of the Democratic Convention, which took place last September, was to showcase a well-constructed narrative that allowed the people to see themselves and the president as mirror images of one another. By recovering the stories of ordinary individuals who had struggled to find equality through social justice and inclusion, and thereby embodying the myth of the American dream, Obama regained the significance that had been missing in the last 4 years. Indeed, the new Obama narrative placed him with enough advantage against Mitt Romney for a few weeks. Clearly, for the first time in his campaign for a second term of his presidency, Obama was engaged in a critical disclosure about a future past, based on his position of becoming the agent who could help the people to recover the American dream myth. In this effort, Obama relied in bringing up to the public the multiple stories of individuals like him, while constructing a larger narrative of a future past. These individual stories were woven as a tapestry of a whole project, which could produce the significance that was missing in the last 4 years. The successful narrative performed at the Democratic Convention, however, partial still was, allowed him to reestablish the moral story of the American people. The significance lied in how the mirror image between the people and him could allow them to see themselves as an embodiment of the mythical narrative of the American dream, connecting it to the value of equality. The first storyteller, Julian Castro, the son of immigrants from Mexico, described his grandmother's hard journey into the United States. Here you see the twins, the twin brothers. The grandmother, she was not able to speak English, but it did not stop her from finding a job as a house cleaner or do whatever necessary to send her daughter to school where she could learn English. And then her daughter was able to send her own children to school. It was in this third generation, which included Julian Castro and his twin brother, that the family was able to fulfill the dreams of the grandmother and relay them to the goals of the founding fathers. Indeed, both brothers have become main political actors of the Democratic Party. One is the mayor of San Antonio, Texas, and the other ran for Congress.
Prayed to God for just one grandbaby before she died. You can imagine her excitement when she found out her prayers would be answered. Twice over. She was so excited that the day before Joaquin and I were born, she entered a menudo cook-off, and she won $300. That's how she paid our hospital bill.
Oh, this is very good.
By the time...
In the same vein, Michelle Obama's speech was focused on recovering her story and that of her husband as exemplifying the values of the middle-class families who struggled to pay off their student loans from college and law school, values that eventually helped them become the first African-American couple to live in the White House.
All you have to guide you are your values and your vision and the life experiences that make you who you are.
So well rehearsed.
So
it's a performance.
When it comes to rebuilding our economy, Barack is thinking about folks like my dad and like his grandmother. He's thinking about the pride that comes from a hard day's work. That's why he signed the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, to help women get equal pay for
We
equal
need to
work.
have context and embodiment of the values.
That's why he cut taxes for working families and small businesses and fought to get the auto industry back on its feet. That's how he brought our economy from the brink of collapse to creating jobs again. Jobs you can raise a family on, good jobs, right here in the United States of America.
Thank you. So the narratives presented at the Democratic Convention, however partial, allow the president to reestablish the moral story of the American people and connect it to the value of equality. Together, they articulated the significance of the myth of the American dream, a grand view about the moral values and progressive views of a political project which they claim the Democrats could only represent. For the first time in his campaign for a second term, Obama was engaged in a critical disclosure about a future past based on his position as the agent who could help the people to recover the American dream myth. The empty signifier was not Obama anymore, but the people. Preparing the way for Obama, who gave the last speech of the convention, was Bill Clinton. Clinton's passionate oration carefully articulated what Obama had done as president, and his reconstruction of Obama's political position drew an ideological map where he showed who held the progressive view and who did not. Thus, he allowed people to see for themselves which road to follow and to judge whom to vote for.
First, the Romney Plan fails the first test of fiscal responsibility. The numbers just don't add up. I mean,
people need to
consider
be
this.
understanding
What would you
this.
do if you had this problem? Somebody says, oh, we got a big debt problem, we got to reduce the debt. So what's the first thing you say we're going to do? Well, to reduce the debt, we're going to have another $5 trillion in tax cuts, heavily weighted to upper income people. So we'll make the debt hole bigger before we start to get out of it. Now, when you say, what are you going to do about this $5 trillion you just added on? They say, oh, we'll make it up by eliminating loopholes in the tax code. So then you ask, well, which loopholes and how much? You know what they say? See me about that after the election. I'm not making it up. That's their position. See me about that after the election.
See, the people is
Now,
fantastic.
people ask me all the time how we got 4 surplus budgets in a row. What new ideas did we bring to Washington? I always give a one-word answer. Arithmetic.
Thank you. Well, when Obama finally came on stage, he made it clear that in order to succeed in his second term, he needed the active participation of all members of civil society, of the citizens as active agents, of all those who had no privileges but know how to work hard in order to achieve better lives for them and their children. A narrative like that can make a huge impact in people's lives and choices, and it usually does, because the values it expresses become embedded with ideologies, and ideologies are always open to discussion, as we've seen with Bill Clinton, since they usually draw their significance by connecting with future goals. Viewed in this way, the American dream myth acquired the significance by representing the principles of justice that are related to values about equality and social inclusion. These values make up the vast normative space, filling up the social imaginary that I spoke to you before, that can be shared by the collective we call the people. Indeed, Obama's new narrative gave him a decided advantage against Mitt Romney for a few weeks, at least until the first presidential debate. But if it's true that in politics, narratives play a huge role in allowing people to see themselves as agents, able to participate in political action and attempt to go from one goal into another, politics also needs the help of history to construct or reconstruct its connection to a past. History is the place where theories play a fundamental role in providing the theoretical map to the disclosure of universal goals of justice. And its success lies in how well this past becomes attached to a powerful moral narrative, a disclosive device about how political agents can rescue the past experiences of other actors and then become connected to the future political goals or expectations of the present agents. This is the reason we cannot do without grand narratives of the political. Stories of foundation, iterations of an original moment, or its creative reappropriation, a rupture with the past, all are thus essential past constructs that build up our horizons of expectations as futures past. But what about theories as grand narratives? Can they still play a role in this construction between past and present? I believe they can, even if they are fallible. The fact is that the conceptual coinage of categories and metaphors can also contribute a great deal to the articulation of the significance for any political project. The limits of grand theories and their fallibility indicate an important lesson of postmodern criticism. Theories do not work by themselves. Do not. We rely on them because they help disclose paths of action to us as political agents. We are more aware about how complex societies are and how difficult it is to grasp social transformations for the better. But we should move away from an endless debate about memory and the subsequent post-memory stage and focus on why we need the mediating articulation of the disclosure of the future in order to build up political agency. Indeed, political projects are never just a story with a happy ending. Political projects belong to political agents, and stories about the past are always open to change, depending on who the actors are and what they choose to recover from the past. This is why politics cannot avoid bringing back the most important aspect of political public deliberations, the role played by ideology. The critical recovery of experiences allows us to see when narratives are exclusionary or when they are inclusive and promote social justice. This Obama didn't know how to do. Arendt told us that actions cannot be controlled because we can never be sure how they will end. We can say the same thing about the past. It is never a static entity. It is not a fixed picture of something. It is the means to the political construction of the future. Thus, we cannot think of stories that are finalist or redemptive simply as a matter of who won the power and who lost it. What matters most is who is the agent of the recovery of the narrative. Actors are always placed in one end or the other of the political spectrum, of exclusion or inclusion, because they have specific goals and values about political measures that translate in seeking justice or in holding onto self-privileges. So the last part of my paper, the critical tools of postmodern theories, 3 models of future past. Thus far, we have seen that there are 2 ways in which to think about grand theories. One is related to the recoveries of myths. The other is related to finding new ways of looking at things and making them disclosive for the agents of social change. We have also realized that both play a major role in politics. Now we need to go back to some of the postmodern criticism and to see what was at stake in its arguments against grand theories. A major objection of the postmoderns was that narratives possess no real authority and that they are incapable of establishing differences between facts and fictions. In order to better understand this criticism, we need to provide some nuances. For example, postmodern theories conflated the question of the authority of a text with the claim to the authority of a theory as a final truth. In politics, a narrative cannot claim to be the truth, as this would lead to authoritarianism or worse, insofar as its status as truth would give it the authority of a dogma and thus prohibit any criticisms. But we still have some kind of normative standards of validity about what the values or goals of the narrative in question in relation to political justice are. Its validity works out as a construction of the possibilities of offering compelling reasons for a change for the better. Social and political data and social and political hopes and goals that help agents disclose the maps of social justice. Together, they allow us to create a connection between the goals of universal justice, or justice for all, and the significance they have in people's minds. I have used Obama's example to show that politics needs narratives, because without them there is no possible connection between past and future, between experiences and significance, and between the moral and political textures of those experiences in terms of future expectations. We have to connect them now with how narratives can help us imagine a possible future as social change, or as Nancy Fraser has recently argued, as emancipation. It is here where conceptual change as disclosure becomes apparent, where theories become tools of disclosure. We cannot afford to live without the possible drawings or settings for our future expectations. However, such images, visions, do not depend only on how a theorist can build up a set of normative criticisms about what has happened and why. We need to see how certain theories engage us with disclosive means by the use of metaphors, myths, and the coinage of concepts that help us find new ways of seeing things. In order for individuals to imagine themselves as political agents, they themselves must also decide that the ills of society are unacceptable. As Cook argues, it is important to see that on the model of critical theory I propose, the need for explanation arises once the theory has succeeded in motivating praxis. Thus, the need for explanation arises once the theory's critical perspective allows disclosure and the corresponding emancipatory projection of a good society, which have motivated autonomous agents to act with a view to bringing about social change for the better. Only then can the territory of emancipation become visible. In returning to the criticism of the postmoderns, their claims finally led to what today we call the subjectivist turn. Having fought against finalist views or grand claims of truth in favor of theories related to history and memory, they develop a radical view about the subject who narrates, and they concentrated on this position, but not on the space of future expectations. The postmodern radical theoretical positions have built up a void that we should assess critically. We need to realize that what has happened to Obama is also happening to societies in Europe. And the question then forces us to focus on the models that I propose for thinking about future paths. Going back there, the foundational model, which was articulated in Hannah Arendt's understanding of her idea of revolution, was based on the American Revolution. It drew its sources of significance first from the Roman Republic and on the creative reappropriation of it by the American Revolution and the Founding Fathers. Weaving those experiences of the Republic versus the new way of understanding power within the project of an American Constitution was seen by her as an ongoing process of a foundational narrative or a new beginning. I have a very good example here with Henry V by Shakespeare. And this is the San Crispin foundational speech the night before the Battle of San Crispin took place, where Henry is already thinking about the future past. Oh, this is a foundational moment, as you can see. And it's very exciting. Well, this is what I think Hannah Arendt was thinking when she was thinking about, of course, the refoundation of the Roman Republic in the reconstruction done by the Founding Fathers, in the sense that they had, of course, the Roman Republic as the first experience that had successfully shared power, and that was a new beginning.
Of course, slaughtered their prisoners.
Yeah, we could discuss this because I mean she always thought that there was always a moment of violence involved in the foundation, but you know that you must go on, and then we can discuss that. So let me just tell you a little bit about the other two models. I call the second model the continuous or normalizing one, because the winners of political battles or wars are the ones who propose how to recover a past. There are many good examples of this, but I would like to concentrate on the Spanish transition to democracy in the late 1970s, because it originally appeared as if the death of the dictator Franco was the end of an era. The political actors of the Spanish project of transition, which were all the parties, including the Communist Party, which was only then legalized, decided not to fight against Franco's past. They made a political pact to leave their past behind and make the transition to democracy their priority. Doing otherwise, they thought, would put their project in danger. They believed that democracy could be achieved without a reconstruction of the paradigm of justice behind it. Many years later, their past has returned. The Spanish were involved into creating a law where memory became a duty, but it is a very ambiguous and limited one. Once the system was created, they had difficulties engaging with accountability for past crimes, which are essential to the exercises and duties of memory. When the judge, Baltasar Garzón, who was a key agent in indicting Pinochet while visiting the ex-Prime Minister Thatcher in England, wanted to prosecute criminals from the times of Franco's dictatorship, the judicial and the fascist groups collaborated in bringing charges against him, the judge, for another case he was prosecuting. The fascist and conservative judges finally stripped him of his duties as a judge. As he's not anymore a judge, as you know, he has been dismissed from his public position as a judge. The past might not be forgotten for the families of the victims of Franco, but the elites are against any revision about what happened in the past. The bizarre rejection of accountability has proven that the judicial branch is not really independent, and its decisions are not dictated by justice or the laws, but by politics. Lacking transparency, self-criticism, and the constitutional capacity to reflect about crimes from the past, the Spanish democracy is now being questioned. The third and last example is the model of the rupture with the past, which I have examined this example extensively in my book, Narrating Evil. Here I want to focus specifically on Argentina's military dictatorship and the dirty war that was responsible for the kidnapping, disappearance, murder, and torture of more than 30,000 people. Once the government became even more delegitimized after the defeat of the Falklands War with Great Britain, the military ostensibly capitulated, but still held power behind the scenes. The first democratically elected government, led by Raúl Alfonsín, tried to prosecute the individuals responsible for the crimes against the Argentinian people, but every time a prosecution was ordered, the army threatened Alfonsín's government with a coup, even though the trials were open to the public and were broadly broadcast on television. The next president, Carlos Menem, gave the military full amnesty. Many years passed. Finally, when the Spanish judge Garzón indicted one of the criminals, Adolfo Cilingo, an Argentinian naval officer in Spain, Cilingo admitted that soldiers had drugged many of the people they had kidnapped and thrown them into the ocean from airplanes. The fact that the international justice system had taken actions against Cilingo and others involving crimes against humanity during the Argentinian dictatorship reawakened the people's need to prosecute those criminals in Argentina. While the resistance against oblivion regarding the criminals and their crimes continued to be strong, the madres and abuelas of the Plaza de Mayo never stopped seeking information about their loved ones, collecting DNA from their close relatives, and exchanging their findings with like-minded organizations. However arduous and difficult their efforts, the individuals who were involved in recovering information about the Argentinian genocide worked relentlessly until they succeeded. President Néstor Kirchner and later his wife Cristina Fernández urged the prosecution of many military criminals who were eventually found guilty in public trials. The Argentinians were finally able to find political justice through an ongoing process of accountability for the crimes committed during the dictatorship. These efforts of recovering the past have helped to make a new beginning for the Argentinian people, allowing them to construct their future past as a rupture. It is no wonder that during Kirchner's terms in office, Argentina became the only country in Latin America that refused to accept the harsh economic terms imposed by the IMF. Freed from their international debt, Argentina is slowly and painfully undergoing a transition to establish itself as a democratic and independent country. Although many people now are very critical of Cristina's authoritarianism, she's done a lot of good things. Unfortunately, she has an authoritarian character. In these three different models, different futures past were actually drawn by the efforts of agents. Their narratives of the past became a vehicle, a construct, through which they could articulate the disclosure of the future. In my view, only the first and the third models were actually successful. We could call those successful processes involved in constructing the future past as learning processes. What they have in common is that they foster change for the better in the form of political institutions that can build up a new shared notion of justice. Thus, the morality of the narrative can be articulated. Actors play a big role in protecting the processes of the past as a construction, since it involves relentless and public critical examination. It also allows the movement of transformation as a possibility for a new or an emancipatory beginning. Thank you very much.